We came home, it was still daylight, having prayed the rosary at church. And I went in my grandparents' backyard. They live right across the street from us. And I was there alone. Couldn't have been more than 7, 8 years old. And I was at peace with the whole world. And I was smelling the lilacs in the backyard. My grandmother's yard was filled with big lilac bushes. And they were fully in bloom. At peace with the world, and all of a sudden there was a woman there. Kind of startled me. But that was not unusual. My grandparents lived in a very large 4-family home. My grandmother's brothers and sisters, some of them each had one of the 4 apartments. And there were people coming and going all the time. It was a very busy place in the days when families all used to live together. You remember that when some of us were younger? You remember when families all stayed together? On Sunday, you'd gather. We all gathered at my grandmother's house. That was the place we gathered. But families seemed to be much closer in those days. So seeing a strange person in my grandparents' backyard, that was not odd, but it did take me back a little bit. I was startled. But the beautiful young lady, she smiled at me. And I'll never forget it. She said one word. One word is all she said, my name, and what they used to call me in those days, Johnny. And I was embarrassed. When I was probably the most shy, introverted kid in history. And I was very embarrassed, and I kind of turned away, and when I looked back, she was gone. I thought maybe went into Aunt Mary's house. Never thought another thing about it for, it must be, let's see, 32 years, 33 years. Never thought about that incident ever in my life. Until much later. Well, it must have been shortly after that incident. I remember another moment in time. You remember some of those moments in your life, some of them that stand out? When you can remember those incidents, out of a billion others, they're important. For whatever reason, they're important. I have forgotten most of my life. Happily. Thankfully. Some of it I wouldn't want to remember. But I remember certain things like it was yesterday. They're just like, they're important. There's something about them. Well, I remember one, it was winter, and I remember thinking something special about me. Something different about me. I don't know what it is, but I know that I'm special. Now, by the way, I'm not. Every one of us is. Okay? But I was having a little boy's intuition here that I was unique. Now, the fact of the matter is, you are unique. Every one of us is unique. We are unique, precious, and unrepeatable. I mean, if fingerprints are all different, and they are, and if snowflakes are all different, and they are, persons, people, individuals are so different. You know, St. Thomas Aquinas once taught on the angels. He wrote a very famous theological treatise on the angels. He called it his treatise on separated substances. That what he was referring to angels. And what he was basically, his thesis was, he was talking all about angels, that every angel is so different from every other angel as to constitute a separate species unto itself. That's how different the angels are. Now, we're not angels, but we are very high in the hierarchy of being. Every one of us is unique, precious, and unrepeatable. And you can't lose sight of that. And if you have allowed the cynicism and rejection of the world to beat that out of you, take back what's yours, because you are indeed special. But before you don't let that go to your head. Because the reason you're special is because of God. Well, I had that intuition. And I really had a desire in that moment to make my parents proud of me. I wanted, especially my mother and my father. My father was a hard man. Now, my dad passed away this year. You know, I don't know if y'all know, I buried my dad September 11th. And the sun. I buried my father September 11th. It didn't have anything to do with the tragedies that took place that day. His funeral was September 11th. I flew down to Los Angeles for the funeral. I was going to be the one celebrating the funeral rites. My lady, my office manager who runs my office, called me up early in the morning, said, turn on the television, and the rest is history. But I buried my dad September 11th. My dad was a hard man. Now, in his old age, he mellowed out, as we say. But when he was young, he was a hard man, not altogether what he should have been as a husband and a father. But he taught me something. My dad was an athlete, a very good one. He was an excellent athlete. He was one of those extremely physical guys. Now, he was known for being tough. He played a lot of sports, but he was a boxer. And the one thing he taught me, the one thing, maybe the only thing I can recall that he ever taught me, he probably taught me more than one thing, but the only thing I recall that he really got into my head, don't you dare quit. Don't you dare lay down and quit. Don't you ever throw the fight. And I don't care how bad you're getting beat. Don't you dare lay down on me and quit. And my father was so serious about that, I interiorized that and carried it with me for the rest of my life, although I never thought about it specifically. Well, time went on, and I tried to excel in different things, and I had to overcome some handicaps. The biggest handicap I had, and this is the truth, now don't laugh when I say this. The biggest handicap I had to overcome, I was so introverted and shy, I couldn't open my mouth in front of anybody. I would hide. When I had to go to school, I would literally hide so I didn't have to go, especially if I knew I had to recite a lesson or something in school. I was so frightened of that. And a lot of other things. Probably a psychiatrist would have a wonderful time with me. Well, sports presented itself as the thing that would get me out of the rut, like many of the boys in my neighborhood. And it was kind of a rough neighborhood, like I said. It was the old part of town, downtown. And athletics was a way out for a lot of us. And so I began, although I have to say until I was 12, I was too scared to get serious about it. And then when I had just turned 12, my mother brought me up to the local playground. They had every summer, they had a series. They had a playground director, and they had different things that you could do, sports and games. And the playground director that summer was an All-American end on the Boston College football team. And he was one of my better friends' big brother. And my mother dragged me up there by the ear and told that man, she said, now, my son is so afraid to do anything. He is so introverted. He is so timid and scared. Do something with him, would you? He was a very kind man. He was an African-American man, about 6'4", 250 pounds. And he said, how about I show you how to do a push-up? And then he began to show me these different, well, then he taught me how to box. And his younger brother, who was a good friend of mine, we became the best boxers around. I trained in the same gym that one day Mike Tyson would train in Catskill, New York, where he started. In any event, I began to develop self-confidence, and I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is my way to greatness. And I had great hope. Hope is a wonderful thing when you have it in your heart. I went almost all the way in the Golden Gloves, but I didn't. I did not win. There is always somebody bigger, faster, stronger, sooner or later. Well, my hopes were dashed. Funny thing, when you hope in something created, you set yourself up for disappointment. Time went on. I finished high school. The Vietnam War came. I always loved the military. I've just come from a conference last weekend in Virginia. I was in Woodbridge, Virginia last weekend. It's very close to Washington, D.C. It was a very successful conference, a great number of military people there. Actually, there were even admirals and a couple generals there. And I always liked the military. And so I enlisted in the Army at the age of 18. I had a medical deferment back then in the days of the draft. I had a 4F deferment because of a football injury to my shoulder. And that was like a prized possession in those days. Man. I mean, people would have paid $100,000 or more for a 4F deferment if they'd have had it. Well, I didn't want to get out. I enlisted in the Army after rigorous training with the equivalent of a physical or personal trainer, you'd call it today. I didn't pay this guy. He's just a friend. And I got in and enlisted with an enlistment commitment for the Special Forces. And having I loved the idea of the military. Now, you know, from when I was a little boy, I do not ever remember playing anything when I was a boy. I never played anything other than soldier. My favorite toys were guns. Now, I'm telling you all these things. A lot of you don't know me. They say, what that kind of priest is this? I only liked violent sports, football and boxing, and I only played soldier. Matter of fact, when I was 7, 8 years old, I remember the only prayer that I ever remember in my life, spontaneous prayer. I remember a little boy, I knelt down to say my prayers before I went to sleep, and I said, "Oh Lord, please do not let me die like other men, in bed, sick, old. I want to go with my boots on." I'd seen me some cowboy movies. And either, you know, cowboy or soldier, but with my boots on in a blaze of glory. Watch out what you ask for. Anyway, I enlisted in the Army, went through all that training. It was in the South. I went in April, and you know what, when you go in the Army in April, you know what's coming? Summer in the South. Hot, humid. I first went to South Carolina, then I went to Alabama, and then I went to Georgia, and then I went to North Carolina. I ate more red dirt in the South. Oh, I remember it. With each succeeding stage of training, it got harder and harder. Didn't get easier, it got harder. They turned up the heat. Forced marches, 30 miles a day through the swamp, full-packed guns. Come in 10, 11 o'clock at night, exhausted, 5 minutes to eat. And you had to do 25 pull-ups before you got into mess hall. I remember the last 2 weeks of my training, E&E. When I said that, all the Army people, where I was by Washington, D.C. last weekend, they all I saw the expressions. They all knew what it was, E&E, escape and evasion. Last 2 weeks, night jump, parachute jump, into the Okefenokee Swamp. That's the largest swamp in the United States. Wonderful. I really liked it. I have always had more zeal than brains. And then we parachuted into the darkness and landed in a swamp full of alligators and poisonous snakes. We had a topographical map, a compass, a survival knife, length of fishing line with a hook, and we had to go alone, not in groups, alone. And they had a battalion of rangers hunting us, and you didn't want to get caught. I loved it. I loved it. I had always loved the outdoors. I had a big advantage. I wasn't scared of anything out there. And, you know, you got to survive for 2 weeks. So, well, how would you do that? I was talking to a lady who was a retired Navy captain. I met her last week, and she was a pilot and in the Navy. And she had gone through survival school and so forth. And we were comparing notes and laughing. But it was wonderful. I just, slogging through the swamp, trying to keep from getting caught, trying to stay alive. You ever eat a snake?